All right, friends. As prefaced on episode 63 of the Spicer Speaking podcast, it is no gamble that we've got a great guest on this week's episode. She is the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs and Experiential Learning at University of the Pacific McGeorge Law School up yonder, Sacramento, California. Certainly seen and read about her speaking as an expert on the topic that we are discussed today, that being Props 26 and 27, respectively, in the upcoming November midterm elections. Welcome, Mary-Beth Moylan, to the Spicer Speaking podcast. Hello, Dean.
Hello, thanks for having me on today.
Appreciate your time. You might also appreciate a legal reference. Let's go back to the movie Philadelphia, where Denzel Washington liked to say, explain this to me like I'm a 6-year-old. I think I've read, and I'm not an idiot. I'm not the smartest guy ever, but I'm not an idiot. I think I've read 6, 8, 10, maybe a dozen different articles on Props 26 and 27, Mary-Beth, which we've seen advertised readily, and that's even putting it a bit mildly. And I'm still trying to get it. There's a lot of fine print there. Explain to me like I'm a 6-year-old, and to the podcast listeners, what exactly are we looking at with Props 26 and 27?
So first of all, I want to say that it's not just you. It's all of us, right? These are complex propositions, particularly Proposition 27, which all by itself is about a 63-page change to the law. So if every voter in California actually sat down and read through it, number one, not all of it would they understand, but number two, it would take an awfully long time. We have this thing in California called direct democracy. The idea is that an educated electorate will vote and be able to make decisions on important policy choices. And yet when we have something like a 63-page change to the law, it's very difficult for us to be an educated electorate. So talks like this are really important, and people trying to be as informed as they can about what they're voting on is really important. But our proponents of some of these initiatives do not make it easy for us. So let me give you a brief overview, but it won't be complete because I could do a 2-hour lecture on Prop 27 alone, and we still would not fully explore all of the nuances. But okay, the 2-minute version, Proposition 26, which is the California Sports Wagering Regulation and Unlawful Gambling Enforcement Act, would allow for sports wagering in person on tribal lands and at 4 different racetracks that already exist, and it names 4 specific tracks where there could be in-person sports wagering, and then on tribal lands of tribes that already have gaming compacts with the state of California. So it's a pretty limited expansion of what are already some rules that allow for gambling. It would allow for the sports wagering. It would also allow roulette and some dice games to be engaged in person on tribal lands and at the racetracks. That's Prop 26. I would say it is a modest, but it's an expansion. It's an expansion of gambling in California.
Okay.
Proposition 27, which is called the California Solutions to Homelessness and Mental Health Support Act, would allow for online sports betting. So not in person. It would add a section to our California Constitution that would allow a gaming tribe to engage in a contract with an online sports betting platform. And it would create, well, it would create a lot of things. First of all, Prop 27 is a much more expansive initiative, but it would also really burst open the mobile or online gaming in our state. So it's sponsored by all of the big players, industry players in the online sports betting, DraftKings, and all of those types of
FanDuel, BetMGM,
FanDuel.
so forth.
They're all behind it, and they want to open up California to legal online gambling. That's the objective. In so doing, though, they have proposed in Proposition 27 the creation of a new commission to regulate this. So it creates a 17-member commission that would have various seats appointed by various elected officials. It creates a new trust fund where some percentage of the proceeds from this online gambling would go to homelessness and mental health care, and some percentage would go to tribal economic development for tribes that do not have gaming compacts. So that's why the non-gaming tribes like this, because they get a cut of some of the profits. How much profit there actually will be is undetermined, because of course we're also setting up a whole new commission, and that costs money to regulate this. The odd thing is, in California, we already have several agencies or commissions that are already charged with regulating gambling. So Prop 26 would just use the existing regulatory bodies. Prop 27 decides we don't want to have the power rest with those. And we can get into this a little later, but there are some questions about what that would mean to have yet another regulatory body coming in. So I'll kind of stop there.
Sure, it's a straightforward question that there is really no simple or straightforward answer. There's a lot of gray area, especially related to Prop 27. Perhaps more simply stated are some of the numbers. I think it's, correct me if I'm wrong, 33 states or US jurisdictions that currently have legalized sports betting or online or mobile wagering in some form or another. California, however, is basically the golden goose. It's the largest state in the country. It has, in turn, the largest population of clients, potential customers, 21 and older, over 23 million people that could become gamblers online, all of which helps explain the vast amounts of money that we're seeing thrown this, and subsequently what one could say is almost an assault of advertising. I mean, here in Southern California, you can't go 5 minutes without seeing a commercial, can't probably drive 5 miles without seeing a billboard, you can't listen to the radio for 5 minutes without hearing an ad via that medium. The amount of money behind this, just what I've read, Dean, some of the entities we referenced, FanDuel, DraftKings, BetMGM, they're at nearly $17 million a piece in backing this measure. And then there's a handful of others that are around 12 or $13 million a piece. It's a big deal. It's big business.
Yeah, in the first 3 months, I believe, of since they opened a campaign account, right, an account to raise money in support of for the yes side of Prop 27, they had $100 million in the first 3 months that they were able to work with. And so I think they currently, well, my data is maybe a couple weeks old. They still had about 77 million, even after what they have spent in the first few months. So, and almost all of that money came from, these big gambling enterprises who plan to enter into agreements with tribes to be able to profit from this. So I think, and the no side has money too, right? Because most of the, I won't say most, many of the gaming tribes in California have put money into the no side of Prop 27. So there was about a couple of weeks ago when I checked Cal Access, there was about 20 million that had been put into the no side. But there's plenty more, I think, that will be coming in these next few months. So
why do you think that we are seeing more advertising? Actually, I think it's way more advertising where the yes on 26 is kind of is among the fine print, where the no on 27, as backed by the tribes, is really above the fold.
well, I think that some of the tribes are very worried about 27 passing and really cutting down on their business. I think that 26, again, it's a much more modest expansion. I don't think it has the same potential to hugely transform the landscape of gambling in California, right? I think that 27 has the potential of really changing the game, so to speak, pun intended, I suppose.
Friends, you're tuning into episode 63 of the Spice for Speaking podcast. Mary-Beth Moylan, she's the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs and Experiential Learning at University of the Pacific McGeorge Law School in Sacramento, California. She is my guest as we're sorting through Props 26 and Prop 27 on the ballot, both of them for the upcoming midterm elections here in California. Stick with the money here a little bit, Dean. One other thing I wanted to clarify, the licensing fee, if Prop 27 were to pass, $100 million a pop if they want to do the business, and said gambling entity would need to formally attach itself with a specific tribe. Is that accurate?
That's my understanding.
Okay. And yet, given that, the tribes are still trying to push the no on 27 vote. Do you get a sense why that is?
Yeah, because I think even with that licensing fee and even with that agreement, I think that there's going to be tremendous, I mean, let's face it, if you're in gambling industry corporation, and you are putting this kind of money that we just talked about into this, you have to imagine that there is something in it for you, right? And so the part that's in it for you is not going to go to the tribes. It is going to go in the pockets of FanDuel and DraftKings and MGM. And that is, I think, the tribes are fearful that that is going to really pull away from and detract from what is their monopoly on gambling in California. And so even though a DraftKings might have to enter into an agreement and provide some amount of money to a tribe, it's not going to be comparable to the power that the tribes have when they are the only show in town.
Personally, and this is just yours truly speaking, I mean, being a Minnesota native, well-versed on Native American heritage, and now here in Southern California, it's a big part of the economy, for some lifestyle. I mean, where I live in the Palm Springs area, we've got, I think, 9 tribal casinos within about a 40 or 50 mile radius. I support their casino business basically as reparations. However, these advertisements do feel like a bit of a hypocrisy to me. When you sort through it and the messages that they're trying to get across, what it says to me is, don't give them your gambling money. Keep your gambling money with us.
Well, and I think sure. I mean, I definitely, I see that perspective. And I also, I myself am not a gambler. I'm just going to go out on a limb and say, and I'll be personal too, right? I won't support either of these measures. I don't think it's a good thing for California to expand gambling. So that's my own personal opinion. That has nothing to do with how I teach my class or what my students will be doing when they study the initiative process, and they will be studying these two initiatives and doing an objective and neutral analysis of them. So I wear the hat at work of, we're going to look at these things really neutrally. And my own personal belief is we have too many initiatives. So I generally default to no. But that said, I do think that the opening up of the online gambling is categorically different than saying, if people want to travel to tribal lands and go to a casino and engage in gambling there, that is a different category of gambling
Sure.
than anyone being able to do it anywhere in the state on their mobile device. You can have better checks on the age restrictions and things like that. As a parent, I think, I'm not wild about the idea that mobile devices are the gateway to addictive gambling habits, right? I mean, I think that there are people who are worried about that.
And in that same vein, one of the commercials, and probably the most aggressive commercial, it essentially equates legalized mobile gambling to having a loaded gun in the pocket of a child. I mean, that is your traditional scare tactic, election year or midterm election year type of scare commercial.
Yeah.
I've seen you on video, on television, and in a couple articles speak to the veracity of that particular commercial. It's aggressive advertising. It sounds like you kind of agree with that ad, that it does possess dangers despite all the technology and the like geo-tracking protections to not have underage gambling on a cell phone.
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea that you're going to protect against underage gambling through things like geo-tracking or I mean, really, let's be honest, right? All of our kids know how to get around things way better than we do. And so I don't think that the protections that are in place to stop underage gaming are real ones. That said, I am not a fan of an overstatement like it's a loaded gun, right? I mean, that seems to me
I could have found something better, but it's just so aggressive as to try to
it's
scare the
aggressive.
viewer. Yeah.
And I think that unfortunately that's where we are in terms of the advertising around elections and around initiatives in particular. People have figured out that the highly personalized, highly negative attack ads, they do seem to work. And so we find ourselves inundated with what is not always accurate information. It's not a deep look into the pros and cons of the policy. It's scare tactics and it's sound bites. And unfortunately, a lot of California voters are voting on feelings and impulses and not a measured and careful analysis of the measures that are being put before us.
As you said, at least as for Prop 27, I can't imagine a large percentage of the electorate's going to sit down to read a 63-page document. A couple more for you today, Dean. This is something that confused me. Clarification, if you will. I've read your impressions and your learned expertise toward this particular question. If both were to pass as yes, I was a little confused by exactly what would happen.
Right. So this is a point that a lot of people are confused about. The law is actually very clear that when you have conflicting measures, two measures that address the same topic, that change the same sections of the Constitution or of a statute. If the laws are in conflict and they both pass, the one that passes with the greater number of votes or the greater percentage of the vote will take effect and the other one will not. So
Okay.
even though, let's say that Prop 26 and Prop 27 both pass, let's say that Prop 27 gets the higher percentage of the vote, Prop 27 would take effect, Prop 26 would not, if the measures are in conflict. So the second part of that question is, are they in conflict? Prop 27 itself says they are not in conflict. Prop 26 is silent. So Proposition 27 actually has a provision written into the initiative, into those 63 pages, that says any other measures on the ballot addressing in-person sports wagering don't conflict with this measure. They can exist together. But that's not really enough. So a judge will decide. The Prop 27 proponents can't just write in, we don't conflict. This would go to court if they both pass, and one passes with more. And it would be some evidence that there isn't a conflict, that the proponents thought there was no conflict. But a judge would have to go through and say, are these measures able to be implemented together without there being any conflict between the changes that they're making? I think that it's a harder argument if Prop 26 passes with more votes to say that they're not in conflict, because Prop 26 very clearly says that it's only expanding for in-person
Right.
gambling, and that you need to be on site to engage in the sports wagering. So if Prop 26 were to get more votes, I think the proponents of Prop 27 would have a very hard time saying that their measure could also take effect, even though they would try. I think they would try to do that.
I ask you lastly today, Dean, we're about 70 days away, somewhere in that window for the midterms. Provided your expertise, provided your location in Sacramento, what do you think? What's your sense of how this is going to play out?
I don't tend to predict. I mean, I will say, I think a lot of people like gambling. I think a lot of people feel like this is happening anyway, and this is just a way to have it be done more legally. And so what's the harm? We'll see. I wish that more people would think critically about all of the things that we're voting on and the possible unintended consequences of those things. There's one more thing I would like to add about
Please.
27, which I think people need to really understand. We often pass things through the initiative process that have flaws, so that there are complex laws being changed, and when we do it through the initiative process, it can't be fixed by the legislature without going back through another vote of the people. So that's the default. Then sometimes initiatives will put into themselves that it can be amended by a 2/3 vote of the legislature or by a simple majority of the legislature. Proposition 27 has a provision in it that says it can only be amended by a 5/6 vote of the legislature. So essentially, we are locking in the terms of this 63-page change of the law, and we will not be able to fix it unless 5/6 of the legislature agrees, which is, nearly impossible, or we do another initiative. So we perpetuate the initiative process in this way by passing things through the initiative that are highly complicated, that can't be fixed easily by our legislative process. And we lock ourselves in to seeing these things come back at us a few years from now to make amendments. So I do think it's so important for people to think and to really read and to critically understand what it is they're doing. There's a reason we have representative democracy. There's a reason we have a legislature, and something like this, a change to our laws with respect to gambling, would be much better done through that process, where if we make a mistake, if we have an unintended consequence, we could go back and fix it.
I like to call this program the crossroads of course and culture, the intersection of sport and society. And with this issue, or I guess issues, given the multiple props on the ballot, we've even got a few more off ramps and crossroads and intersections happening. Thank you so much to Associate Dean Mary-Beth Moylan, Academic Affairs, Experiential Learning, University of the Pacific, McGeorge Law School in Sacramento. Thank you so much, Dean, for helping clarify and sort this out as we grow ever near to this year's midterm elections in November. Appreciate your time.
Sure. Thanks for talking.